Hi there, BTEC. We're going to recap some earlier information on vector and bitmap graphics, and then we're going to move on to some more important information about Task 2. So, vector versus bitmap. What can you remember, and what can I sort of help you with? Well, for starters, vector, usually things like a logo, that would be a good example. A scalable image used in animations, web-based art and other graphics that may be reproduced in a larger or smaller sizes without any loss to the quality, as they're made up of usually very simple plain colours and simple shapes. And the reason they can be rescaled larger or smaller is because the image is made up of mathematics. Okay, it's the numbers involved rather than any particular form and part or pixel. Okay. Bitmaps, on the complete other hand, are usually things like, for example, a photograph taken on a digital camera or a phone or a scanned image. They range in size, and that's always related to the resolution of the image. Obviously, they can't be rescaled easily. They can be rescaled, but they can't be rescaled as easily as a vector graphic. When you resize them, you get that pixelation that you're all aware of. Okay, so looking at your current task, one of the things I want to go through is something called the life cycle. Now, everything has a life cycle. If you've done business studies, you've probably looked at the product life cycle, but there are things like a design life cycle, there are toy life cycles, there's a phone's life cycle. Basically, life cycle are the stages that any one thing will go through. So, let's have a look at the one that relates to your work at the moment. You're going to look at clients' needs and fully understand them before you can select images and select software. After you've understood what your client's after and you've selected the appropriate images and software, then you're going to create some first drafts of images that you've edited to meet the needs and the requirements of your client. After that, you're going to give those images to your client to gauge a response and receive some feedback. At which point you're back up at the top and you'll understand what your client needs from you. You can select either new images or the images that you originally edited, and then you can go back through the making changes and then going to feedback again, etc. So you can see that there is a logical cycle. Okay, so a few things I want to look at. For example, compression techniques. Now this is going to be important in the work you're about to do. What do I mean by a compression technique? Well, it's how big or how small you've made something. So some facts about compression. Now, I will admit these are not my own words. I have taken this from one of the books and some information from a website. So, image compression is minimizing the size in both the bytes and the actual image. Okay? So, it's minimizing the size in bytes of a graphic file without degrading the quality of the image to an unacceptable level. Okay, so making it smaller. The reduction in the file size allows for more images to be stored in a given amount of disk space or memory. It also reduces the time required for images to be sent over the internet or downloaded from web pages. So, if you take an example there, if you compress a file size, then it means if it's loaded on a website, it will load quicker because it doesn't take as much of the energy of the internet to download the image from its original location in order for you to see it. You could save it onto a memory stick, onto a hard disk drive, onto a camera disk, or a, you know fine well the word I'm looking for right now, like an SD card. There we go. So it reduces the amount of space that it takes up, but obviously you've got to make sure that you don't reduce the size of the file so much so that you start to have an effect on the image itself. There are several different ways in which image files can be compressed. For internet use, the two most common compression formats are JPEG and GIF. JPEG method is more often used for photographs. Okay. It's important that you keep compression in mind because you're going to have to actually reference that when you choose a form of compression when creating and saving your image later on in the actual task 2. Okay, some information for you on the software available for editing images. Obviously there's some really complex software out there like Photoshop that you've already looked into. Then there's the more beginners graphics editing software like Paint. But there are also a few rogue elements. Now, Microsoft Word is a word processing program, but it does actually have some very, very, very small scale techniques, tools for editing images. When you import an image into Word, you can, for example, adjust its colour a little. You can adjust the contrast of the image and the brightness of it, and you can also crop. But those are very rudimentary tools in the form of graphics editing. The other two bits of software on the left are far more appropriate. But you do need to be aware that there are options available to you. So, going to look at some software tools and features that you may want to investigate a little bit further and indeed utilize in the work that you're going to carry out yourself. So, looking at things like rotating an image, just like that. Very simple, but there may be a usable reason within your work that rotating an image is appropriate. Obviously, you don't have to rotate an image completely upside down and back right up again. You could tilt it to a slight angle. Okay, what else? Well, we could look at flipping. There you go. That might be appropriate. It might be appropriate to flip an image from the left to the right in order to make it more appealable. You never know. What else? Cropping. Okay, so you've got an image that's particularly large, or you've got a particular area of an image that you are more interested in than the rest of it. You could choose to crop it. Now, we've cut off most of the Olympic mascot characters there, but to somebody with a particularly artistic eye, what we've got there might be seen as a more interesting image, because it draws you towards it to think, ooh, what does it look like? What is it? That's the Union flag there, and that's the 2012 logo, but what... So it draws you in. So sometimes cropping an image can actually make it that bit more interesting and draw the attention. Okay, so some other software tools that you might want to look into. Softening an image, often used in photoshopping, as it gets called, regarding celebrities, when you see them with the amazingly soft skin, which, ladies and gentlemen, is rarely the case in real life on most of the celebrities who you will look at in magazines. You could sharpen an image. There might be a particular area of a photograph or an image that you want to sharpen up so that it's easy to see the features of it. A watermark. Now, this is very important. A watermark is usually when a soft layer of text, for example, or a logo is added to a particular image. Often when images have the copyright logo stamped right in the middle of them, or copyrighted written all the way across them. You might want to use that on your initial photographs. I would encourage you to do so. When you release your first drafts, you could watermark them with the word draft, so it's quite clear and we don't confuse them with the images you produce later. Other things like colour balance, shifting the hue and the saturation in an image, or making a red a stronger red, a green a stronger green, the sky blue a stronger blue. And then things like the contrast and the brightness of an image. Now remember that using these are all ways to actually enhance an image, okay? Obviously sometimes you can make a mistake with them and it does anything but enhance it, but features and tools are always there to actually enhance an image to meet the needs of a client. Okay, so if we look back at the cycle that we were discussing before, and now we can maybe try and directly relate it to the work you're going to do for this graphics project. So if we look at the client's needs being understood, that means that you're going to have to read the client's requirements, okay, and make a list of them so it's very clear to you what the client wants, what image, what do they want done to it, etc., etc. Images and software that's selected, you're going to have to select 2 images and collect evidence to show that others believe that those images are a wise choice. It doesn't necessarily need to be the client at this stage, but it does need to demonstrate that you've shown the images to somebody else to say, look, this is what my project is all about, these are the images I've chosen, do you think that's a good idea? Do they meet the needs initially? First drafts of images edited to meet the needs and requirements of the client. using the layout sheets on the website that I've provided at the bottom of the Task 2 page, you need to save and prepare images which include some notes for you, and so that you can get some feedback from the client on what they think of those initial images. So you're going to have to find a way of saving those images in an appropriate way onto a sheet that allows the client to give you feedback that you can keep for reference later. Actually giving the client the images means that you're going to need to create a feedback sheet to give along with images to help receive some feedback, because you're going to have to improve these images, so we need to have it documented somewhere what the client's asking you to improve. Just a further note before I do forget, because I know I'm going to go on. With the first drafts of your images, some of the information and the notes that you need to include on there are things like how you've saved the image file, what formats of compression you've used, what effects did you use, and why did you use them. The why did you use them is very important. So, let's look at the actual criteria that you are covering by doing this task. Strangely enough, it does include 3 pass criteria, but what you're actually having to do is quite a lot of work for what you might think as is just a pass. So, P3, which is demonstrate the use of editing tools to edit and manipulate images. So you've got to be able to tell me and show me what it is that you did and how you did it. You're also creating an original graphic image to meet a defined user need. So again, that's why we've got to be able to fully understand and make that list of needs from the client. And then P5 is asking you to modify images as the result of some user feedback. So that's why we're going to go through that whole cycle, and you're going to get the feedback from your client, then make changes, and then submit those images as a final image. So if we look at what you're actually going to hand in, I've tried to make a little bit of a list here that might make it easier in your mind to understand what it is you've got to hand in and actually submit as your finished task 2. Now I'm going to list these, the first of course being your initial images, the images you choose. And what I'm going to need you to do, however, is work out how you embed these on your blog. So it might seem initially that I'm asking you to hand in a piece of paper here, but I'm not. You need to be as creative and as ingenious as you can, as inventive as you can, to work out how best to display this evidence on your blog in a digital fashion. So, 1, your initial images that you chose to meet the needs. Some documentation or evidence which shows that your image choice was approved, that it was agreed as being a decent choice. Your edited images in the first draft. The evidence that the client or that others have given you feedback and some areas to improve your images, and then the final images and any other documentation and evidence covering the actions you've taken, the tools, the features you used, and then how you've improved those images for the final hand-in. Okay? There's a lot to be looking at there. And I realise it does seem like a lot to be covering for a pass, but it's a really interesting task, and it's something you really can have fun creating. Okay, so good luck with it, ladies and gentlemen.